Welcome to Around the Weird. Here's your host, the museum curator of the strange and unusual, Mr. Nothing.
Thank you, mysterious voice, and welcome back to Around the Weird, a booktube channel where I talk about all the unusual and out of the ordinary literature that I have found in my travels. Today it is Short Story Tuesday, and I have quite an unusual short story for you. It is a short story from Japan, so talking about the weird and the around the weird. And it is about an unusual letter that a woman receives. It is called The Human Chair by Edogawa Ranpo, which was published in 1925. For those who don't know, Edogawa Ranpo is a Japanese writer and critic. He was known for writing detective stories, but also a little bit of horror, which you see here, and being somewhat political in his writings. One of the stories that he wrote, The Caterpillar, was about a veteran who returned home from the war, and he moved around like a caterpillar because he was an amputee. That was actually censored by the Japanese government during World War II because they thought it would detract from the war effort, which it would. You know, no one's going to want to go to war if they're being told that going to war will disfigure and maim them. So that's really interesting about Edogawa Ranpo. You might notice that his name, which isn't actually his name, it's a pen name, but it sounds pretty similar to Edgar Allan Poe, and that's intentional. He was very interested in Sir Arthur Conan Doyle as well as Edgar Allan Poe, and you see a little bit of that in the story that I'm going to be talking about today. Which I think is great. It's always good to see the influences of Poe and other writers in other cultures, as well as those influences here, so that we can really mix things up and get a different perspective in our writing. This is the first time that I've ever read or talked about Edogawa Ranpo, which I think is great. I'm always looking for that new and exciting type of weird or strange that you don't normally find in American literature. So without further ado, let's talk about The Human Chair. I will do a summary, a little bit of an analysis, and we will move on from there. So The Human Chair focuses on an unusual letter that an author named Yoshiko receives. Yoshiko's husband leaves for the day, and she sits down at her desk and reads letters she receives, mostly from aspiring writers who send them her manuscripts, which she kind of like disregards. But the letter that she received today, even though it's pretty lengthy, is actually just from one person trying to tell her a story, their own personal story. And the more that that Yoshiko reads, the more she becomes enthralled by it, and that's where the rest of the story takes place, sort of in this manuscript. The person in this manuscript describes themselves, or not a manuscript, but like this, and the person in this letter describes themselves as ugly, poor, wretched, isolated, often fantasizing about being with women or having friends or something like that, but finding themselves alone. They're a craftsman. They receive quite a bit of work through that, and they seem to be pretty good at their job. And they find some serenity in making chairs. But again, that's where the fantasy comes in, because whenever they're sitting down, they think about like holding hands with a woman and being together with someone else, and then they come out of that sort of that fantasy and realize that they're alone, and it makes them feel dismal and a little bit of despair. And one day they get an idea to create an armchair, because they were commissioned to create one, but they sort of develop an idea, a sort of kind of a wrong idea to make it a habitable armchair. Like they create enough space inside the armchair so that they can fit into it themselves. And there's a place to go to the bathroom, which is very unusual. But you can also drink, and you can stay in it for 2 to 3 days. And the writer of this letter has it sent to a hotel that is arranged for it to be placed in its lobby. And from there, the writer of the letter begins stealing things from the hotel, making quite a profit off of everything that they're stealing, and not really getting caught because, again, they're hiding in an armchair and no one's really thinking about it. And they also describe a weird and unsettling connection with the people sitting in those chairs because they feel a connectedness to them. They can feel their skeleton or their outline. And they say it reveals a lot about the people sitting down. Of course, the people don't know that there's someone within that chair thinking all of these things. So, very unsettling and terrifying in that regard. Eventually, the hotel is sold to a Japanese family or Japanese owners, and they decide that they're going to get rid of all the fancy things in the hotel, including auctioning off this chair, which is alarming to the person writing the letter. But they're like, oh, well, I guess that means I'll get to be closer to other people. Again, a little bit creepy there. It is revealed through the letter that the chair was sold to a Japanese couple, and the writer of the letter notes that they became intimate with the woman who was sitting in the chair, noting that she he kind of rocked her to sleep, and he massaged her, and the woman seemed to develop a relationship that whenever she was sitting in the chair, it was like being rocked or loved by a mother, even though she did not know this was going on. And at this point, the stranger then reveals to Yoshiko in the letter that the chair that she is sitting in is the one that he had crafted, and that he would very much like to meet Yoshiko. He's roaming about her house right now, and when she is ready, the two of them will meet, and he'll be able to finally introduce himself to this woman that he's become obsessed with. Yoshiko rightfully runs through the house and tries to find protection from servants and other people in the household. And the story ends with another letter coming to Yoshiko, revealing that the entire letter was just a story sent by an author who was trying to alarm her. And the author is wondering if they will publish their story called The Human Chair, and that's where it ends there. In terms of analysis, this story is quite a doozy. But one thing that Ranpo talks about or deals with, or one of the themes they're working with, is despair or kind of self-loathing, those kind of ideas. Because the letter writer in this story, who's unnamed, seems to hate themselves and really the whole world. Like, they're very obsessed with feeling intimate human connection, but they themselves are described as ugly, as wretched, as gross, and not really deserving human company, which is a terrible way to describe yourself. In my opinion, I think the person writing the letter isn't ugly or anything like that, but rather they're only looking inward, and they're realizing that they're kind of a terrifying, horrible individual, and all that ugliness comes from within. I don't think it's external. I think it's just they're looking inward more so than anything else. And you get a sort of split between their fantasies and what's going on in reality, where they fantasize about sitting in a chair with another person having company, and when they can't have that, they sort of fantasize about being in the chair. And once they're in the chair, they fantasize about the person who's sitting in the chair. But because they can't really, they don't really know that person intimately. Like, they can only form like observations based on what they're seeing, of the person in the chair. And, what's on the outside isn't really, a good indicator of what's on the inside for that person. So this person is incredibly fantasizing about the people in this story, and ultimately the end, where they reveal that the person in the chair they were sitting in the chair that they had made. Like, they're still fantasizing about Yoshiko, like wondering what kind of woman she would be, and also developing a sort of parasocial relationship with her. And their internal like monologue is just filled with disgust and hate and everything like that. So what I really like about this is how Ranpo creates like this sort of human monster through their quality writing. The kind of person who would create a chair that they could fit into just to spy on other people, who hates themselves, and who I think would kill somebody if given the chance, and who ultimately like spies on other people and whatnot. I love this writing, and it's very terrifying in a way that reminds me of other writers, which I'll get to in a moment. And even related to this is Yoshiko's own despair upon realizing that the chair she's sitting in might belong to some creepy guy who is sitting in the chair or is roaming through her house right now. As a result of it, she feels a very daunting horror, and she almost goes insane and is running through the house trying to find servants and people to protect her. So that I think we all feel that horror as it dawns on us, and we realize what's going on here. And I think another important element of this story to talk about is the terrifying reveal. I do think that Ranpo does a good job of not just making it sudden, but doing the slow creeping realization. Like, why would the letter writer send this letter to Yoshiko? She's sitting at her desk, which we know, and the slow realization is that, oh no, he's writing to Yoshiko to confess something to her, to admit that he is spying on her. It's a slow realization, and it's really terrifying. So it's building up this tension and like wondering where the writer is going with this, and we kind of understand. And when Yoshiko finds out, there's a shared sense of horror that I think is good, because the horror that like your reality is different than you were expecting, that that you're being spied on, and there's someone so insidious as to create a chair like this, and who might be roaming about your house and could kill you at any moment. Like that horror feels real and authentic to me, It's bizarre, like that I can, because what I can compare it to with Edgar Allan Poe, like his writing is pretty good, but in all of his stories, like I've never felt the dawning horror, the terror that Yoshiko might feel in this story. So I think it's really wonderful. And with that, I do have to discuss the ending, because it does seem like a cop-out, because it's revealed that this was just a manuscript, that the author had sent her a story in order to terrify her. But I do think there's a question that arises out of this, and is the second letter authentic? Did the person who made this chair write the second letter because he saw her realization and didn't want her to, or wanted to go back to the status quo before she knew what was going on? That's very well possible. I would certainly get rid of the chair. After finding that out, I would try to open the chair. I would see if there's someone actually in there, and regardless, I would get rid of the chair anyways, because that story would be very creepy. But there's the implication that second letter could have been a lie, a person trying to cover their tracks. And what's going to happen now that she knows is the person in the chair, is this creepy writer dude, going to try anything further and maybe try to harm her or try to develop a closer relationship to her by force or something like that. There's a lot of questions that I think it raises, and I do like the ending, even though it feels like a cop-out. It's also somewhat more insidious, because there's that question of Yoshiko wondering, like, is this true? Is this not? Was this all just an elaborate joke? Yoshiko doesn't know what to make of her own reality anymore. And then another thing I want to note is the similarities to both Edgar Allan Poe and Mary Shelley, both in this sort of like gothic kind of atmosphere that I think this captures, with creating chairs and that people can fit into, but more so like the idea of a story being told through a letter or something like that, like someone recalling an event that happened to them in the past, with Yoshiko finding this letter and the story progressing kind of through that letter, which you see in both Poe and Shelley's writing, but also capturing the horror atmosphere of it. I mentioned that like Poe and Shelley's stories, like they did have horror, but they couldn't capture it to a degree. So I think in that regards, Ranpo manages to up the ante and make it more horrifying than Poe or Shelley could do. Whereas Poe is more like a ghastly sort of death-based fear, and Shelley is more so about science experiments gone wrong or something like that. Edgar Allan Poe is a bit, Edogawa Ranpo seems to have utilized a sort of stalker kind of vibe here. The fear of not knowing the intentions of others, or if your reality is really consistent with what you think it is. But I do think that the influences are there, and I think it's wonderful to see them in the work of Japanese writing. Anyway, those are my thoughts on The Human Chair by Edogawa Ranpo, a wonderful short story that I definitely recommend you check out. It's August, and this is a great way to start out the month with a short story, because it's creepy, it's well written, and it's even though like you can see the ending kind of coming, it's a fitting ending. It's thematically appropriate, and I definitely suggest anyone who's watching this video go out and read it, especially so we can get more of an understanding of foreign literature, Japanese literature, which I don't read too much about, just because it's really hard to find translations sometimes. Anyway, if you read this before, you simply want to comment on something I said here, do so in the comments below. I would love to hear from you. Otherwise, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so that more people can find out about this author and this short story if they do not already know about them. And until then, I wish you the best of luck in your weird and craftsman-like travels. Farewell.